Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Lords of Limited. My name is Ben Warney, and joining me on the line, as always, is Ethan, halfway to the Pro Tour Sachs. You're on day 2 of the sealed PTQ qualifier on Arena. How does it feel?
It feels fine right now. I was just going over my pool with you. And you got me a little bit more excited about it than I was. We've been here before, right? We've both, I think, for one time before for limited, I've made it to day 2 of one of these things. I've actually made it to day 2 in constructed once back in the day. But yeah, fizzled out pretty quickly. So I don't know. We'll see if my pool can get me there, and we'll make sure to put it up on YouTube.
Yeah, been there before, but you, my friend, have some bombs in your pool this time.
Yeah, I was like really excited because I opened. Almost all of my rares are good, and 3 of them being Gruff Triplets, Fawn's Bane Troll, and Goose Mother. And I was like, "Ooh, just please let my green be like somewhat decent, somewhat deep." It's like the most shallow, unplayable green. I have like 7 other green cards, and they're like the bottom of the barrel, like the 2/4 reach, 2 of the +2/+2 auras that you can get back, the little toadstool, whatever, the 1-drop that has ward 2. So I was feeling like I needed to just sleeve up red-black aggro, but I think Ben is convincing me to do otherwise.
Can't leave those rares on the sideline. One of those green cards is Commune with Nature, which is basically just another copy of all 3 of your rares. I mean, you're always going to find one of the rares off Commune, right? That's how it works.
I mean, you do have to get like to win whatever, to go 7-1 or 7-0 yesterday, and to get, I don't think you actually need to get all 7 wins to qualify, as like one of the members of our Discord, Glosu, did so, I think, in the last limited qualifier. They got there at 5-2. So I don't think you actually need to really get max wins, and you got to get a little lucky, right? So let's get a little lucky with Commune with Nature.
I love it. Yeah. I'm trying to sell you pretty hard on heavy black, light green, gruff triplets, goose mother splashing.
Oh yeah, I forgot to mention literal no fixing, no evolving wilds, no Edgewall no prophetic prism, no scarecrow.
Whoa. My collector's vault, my friend. Excuse me.
Which isn't, it's fixing and card draw, right?
There you go. You're gonna find your bombs faster.
Exactly. Dig towards actually collector that. Now that I'm thinking about it, collector's vault plus oversold cemetery.
That's what I said.
I was processing a lot in the moment. I was feeling a little dejected, and I was trying to get on board, and so yeah, that's part of it. Okay, look, I think that's what I'm gonna run. I need to mull it over, so I will be mostly not present for the next
60
next
minutes of recording.
Podcasting. No, just kidding. Did you take a look at the deck that I qualified with yesterday?
I have not seen it. No, wait, yes, I did. You had double Imidane's Recruiter and every good black and red card in the set, yeah?
No, I was not. I was black-white, so you were not looking.
Clearly, I didn't look very carefully.
It was like black-white mono removal. It was like double Princess Takes Flight, double Stockpiling Celebrant, double Candy Grapple. I had the white sweeper. I had Rankle's Prank as like a double Edict. And then, yeah, Imidane's Recruiter and just like a bunch of ways to recur them, like an Edgewall in and back for seconds. And but a really like interesting pool, like ended up playing 2 Candy Trails in there just to like, I was like, I think I just want the Scry and the life gain, and which I would not have thought about, like, oh, I'm excited to play these Candy Trails in a deck. I chose to be on the draw every time I won the die roll because I had like mono removal and the sweepers, and I don't regret that. I did 2 deck swaps in classic Ethan fashion. Yeah, it was fun. The whole run will be up on our YouTube channel, I think, by the time this episode comes out. So if you want to watch that, there's some fun sealed action for you.
Yeah, your pool today would kill for a couple Candy Trails.
Yeah, right? Exactly. I'd be so happy with some kind of deck manipulation in some way, yeah. But alas, I'll have to rely pretty heavily on the collector's vault if I run the Ben Werney special.
It's going to do it for you. I believe in the vault.
Well, fingers crossed. And no matter what, again, that second run will also be up on our YouTube channel later in the week. So you'll have an opportunity to follow along at home if you want to. But for now, whoa, we're halfway there, Ben. We get to use the episode title.
Heck yeah, we do. Bon Jovi bringing us in to the midway point. Love to see it.
Yeah, last week at the end, we sort of like backtracked as we do around this point about like, okay, so 50 takes is at what week and how many more episodes do we have and what do we want to make sure we're still covering, etc. And then we realized that we kind of blew it because we struck gold a little bit last set when we did the here's how we'd prepare for the Pro Tour episode where we like ranked our commons and uncommons and came to the episodes with separate lists, and we are like, let's do that again. But it felt a little tough to do off the heels of Worlds. Just feels like we missed it, which we did. But I love a secret list. I want to do as many secret lists as possible. So we gave ourselves a different prompt for this week, which was we wanted to bring to the table the idea here was we haven't really talked about the rules of engagement for the format yet, right? So the idea was we're going to bring to the table a tweet, something that is 280 characters or less about the format. And I guess you could sort of do with that what you will. I think the idea was that it would be 5 bullet points, 5 talking points, but like just like you only have this amount of characters to convey as much information to someone as possible. Let's say I was talking to Ben or he was talking to me, and one of us had never touched this format before, never seen the cards, going into a draft blind. What do you need to know about it? And then as maybe a way to talk about some specific cards or some strategies, we also have a list of 5 underrated cards that we want to talk about. How was this for you? Was this pretty easy for you to put together list-wise? Did the talking points come readily, or were you having to really think about how you were going to craft this tweet?
I mean, I had plenty of time to think. I was doing this on Friday night at our Jasper High School football game while the old 8th grade band class that I teach was pulled up to perform at the high schoolers. So while supervising like 120-ish kids-ish, I was carefully applying all of my leftover thought process to this list and these tweets. But yeah, I think I feel good about where I ended up. I think
Excellent.
I approached it slightly differently than you in that it was like where the format is right now. Like if
Mm-hmm.
somebody had been drafting, maybe they had played with the cards. I'm like, maybe they already know it's a Jund format or whatever. Like I assumed they know some things about the format.
Oh, okay, great. All right, well then maybe that'll be perhaps helpful for us in terms of not having a ton of overlap there. And I'm just hoping that the secret lists will spark some conversation. We've got a draft log in the back burner if you and I have trouble filling the time, but it's
Show
unlikely.
notes are a little naked for us.
Show notes are naked, but that's what Ben likes. Ben wants us to have less on the page, more in the air, as it were, between us. So we're gonna have a great conversation today about the format. A couple housekeeping things before we dive into that. First things first is the Patreon page, patreon.com/Lords of Limited. Where folks can go to give back to the show if they so choose. Of course, the show will always be free, but you get access to some great perks over at the Patreon page if you want something like, the old, we're given to PBS or to NPR and you get a tote bag. We have some tote bags for you in the form of Discord membership to the Lords of Limited Discord. It's hopping, it's popping, 24/7 limited tech support. Moving up the reward tier ranks, you get access to the show notes in advance of the episode, get access to the episode a day early even. We're recording on Sunday and then I quickly edit. I don't know how quickly that'll be today with the championship qualifier. Hopefully I'll have a lot of Magic to play before getting to the editing portion of the day, but we'll see. We'll see how that goes. So you get access to the episode day early, get access to monthly coaching sessions with me or Ben if you move all the way up the reward tier ranking. So if any or all of that sounds of interest to you, head on over to the Patreon page. And of course, we want to shout out our new patrons the first week that they join. So this week we're welcoming Samuel, Christopher, Chia, Mike, BRC, James, Evan, Nate, Paul, Lionel, and Andrew. Thank you, thank you, thank you. We really appreciate your support.
Yeah, seriously, cannot say thank you enough. Show is also brought to you by CoolStuffInc.com, where they've got cool stuff in stock. And whoa, name of the format. That's what they've got in stock right now. Those draft booster boxes, if you want to pick one up to draft with your friends sometime down the road. Also, I still am fired up about competitive Magic. I was the one that pitched you the secret commons, uncommons list.
Yeah.
I just want to talk about and play competitive Magic. So if you've got some people around you want to jam with, or maybe you're trying to get a standard deck together, Pioneer, who knows, maybe you need singles for that commander deck, anything that you're purchasing Magic the Gathering related or otherwise, please head on over to coolstuffinc.com and make those purchases there. And when you do, please remember to use checkout code LOL, all caps, to get 5% off your purchase.
All right. So did you make your little 280 characters or less a list, or is it more of a free form paragraph?
Oh, I went with pop, baby. I tried to keep them way less than 280 characters.
Do you have
I
a
think
character?
the best tweets are short, sweet, to the point, my friend.
I
Nobody wants a paragraph in their Twitter scrolling feed.
I agree. I'm sub 200 characters in my my list.
You better be. Those are the rules, man.
No, 280. It's the rules. I'm just telling you. I also chose brevity to be the soul of wit with
Oh,
my
that's good.
list.
Well, look at you, Mr. Theater Major.
There it is, buddy. So do you want to say anything about? You already sort of described your philosophy of okay. So you're really choosing to talk to someone about the format right now, October 1st, live and in theaters. Like anything else you want to give before we get into these points?
I don't think so. Let's quit teasing and get into it.
All right, give me your first bullet there.
Number one, feel very strongly about this one. Feel very passionately. Draft blue and draft white if they're being passed to you.
Okay, great. So this is off the heels of it's a Jund format, and so clearly that means blue and white are terrible, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Of course not.
Yeah.
Because the data just doesn't tell the whole story. So I think it's easy to get caught up in the narrative of the format's aggressive, cabs, you gotta affect the board. And like some of that is certainly true, but there's also my initial reaction to the format was that there were a lot of great cards in the format, a lot of great rares running around that took over the game single handedly. Certainly that was my experience during early access. And I think that still holds true a little bit. Like the gap between blue and white's best cards and Jund's filler cards is significant, right? Like blue and white's best cards are way better than the medium Jund cards. And that's, I think, formats where we've said it's a Grixis format or it's an Abzan format or whatever. A lot of that has been when the format's been out of balance power level wise. And yes, blue suffers at common a little bit, but I do think there's a bit of a groupthink mentality right now with data and with the picture of the format that if you're not willing to draft blue and white, you're certainly missing out on a lot of win percentage equity. There's some drafts that you're supposed to draft blue because everybody else in your pod is trying to get into the Jund colors. And it's not so out of balance that it's not self-correcting in that way.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things when we were brainstorming about an episode to do, and maybe we will even still do something like this down the road, but I was like, well, maybe you've been drafting a lot of blue. Maybe you can talk about blue and I can talk about white. And you're like, I don't really like those episodes where we just sort of monologue at each other, which I agree. We can move away from that. But I think it's worth talking about and digging in a little deeper here about like, what is it about those colors that does hook you? Like when you say what's being passed to you, or are there certain color pairs you like? Because I've been ending up in white quite a lot, blue not so much, but I've been playing a lot of white. Stockpiling Celebrant is just a number one. My top drafted common. I think it is amazing. It does all the things white wants to do. It is not what I think white's best common is, but like if I like the better stockpiling Celebrant is in my white decks, the better my white decks are.
Yeah, I think that certainly makes sense to me and checks out.
Yeah.
For blue, for me, it's largely rares, but I think some people are so averse to blue that they're passing those rares because sometimes I get Italian's Messenger third pick or whatever in the draft,
Mm-hmm.
And then it's very obvious, okay, my neighbors either don't know how to evaluate this card or they really don't want to be blue. Either way, great for me to take Italian's Messenger and move into blue and start drafting blue there. And some of it too is I think if you're not seeing the good aggro cards, you're supposed to try to beat aggro or build a deck that can stop aggro and win the late game. And I think blue is pretty good at doing that.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Is there a color that you're often pairing with blue? Like, are you being like, yeah, I'm interested in blue, but mostly just blue red? Or is there a flavor of blue? It sounds like probably to beat aggro. So are there certain cards? So obviously the rares hook you in, but are there certain commons or uncommons that jump out to you as like, these show up in my decks a lot?
Yeah, I think blue white would be my most common color pair just because I like that and I've enjoyed being a little hipster about the data. But I think blue red is probably better or equally good to blue white. I think those are both the best homes, followed by blue black. And then I'm hoping to not be blue green. And I'm actually kind of down on green in the format just in general because I'm so high on blue and white.
Hmm.
And I do think red has panned out to be the best color.
Mm-hmm.
So I think because I value red first, and I also
Uh-huh.
end up blue and white a lot, and I don't really like green pairing with any of the three of those. Like, really, the only green deck I want to play is black green.
Yeah, I think I would agree with that. Certainly, I think black green as a 2-color deck, black green is green's best color pair.
Right. And so if you're not black green, then you're just like green playing all of the cards. I think
Right.
those are the 2 green decks for me in the format.
And you don't need green for fixing because you've got prophetic
I've got
prisms.
Prop Prism, Collector's Vaults. I've got
Yeah,
Evolving
yeah,
Wilds, baby.
yeah.
Yeah. So you'd asked about specific cards. I think we're going to get into this in the underrated cards section also.
Sure.
But I think Kellen's Light Blades goes criminally late and is premium in decks that want to win the late game. And you can pick up a premium removal spell like that. You also get Hatching Plans late, and Blue's so good at bargaining. You just get the tools. You get good control cards for free, and then you can spend your picks on cards that stonewall the aggro decks.
Yeah, that checks out. I buy it. All right, draft blue and white if they're getting past to you. All right, so my number one point here is, as far as mana value choke point, 3 is the new 4. And this comes up, like, the first time I thought about 4 being the choke point was, I want to say back in, maybe it was M21. You were highlighting some 4 drops of, like, they really have to affect the board when they come into play. And it's why cards like Ashiok's Reaper, for example, from this format, the 4 mana 3/3, whenever an enchantment dies, or whenever an enchantment goes to the graveyard from the battlefield, you draw a card. It's so alluring. It's so appealing. Ooh, the value. But at the end of the day, a 4 mana 3/3 is just really hard to get on board with. Like, the stats for something that doesn't have an immediate effect, like, you sort of have to wait to untap the next turn, and fingers crossed it survives and just dies to a sneeze. And what if you have to just block with it and trade off in combat with a 3 mana 3/2 or a 2 mana 3/1? It feels bad. You're just gonna get got a little bit. I think the 3 mana value slot is so easy to fill up in this format. A great example, I think, is the filler, or the sort of redundancy of blacks, to use black as another example, of black's 3 drops that make a rectangle. So you've got Sweet Tooth Witch at the top of the heap, 3 mana 3/2, makes a food. You've got the Voracious Vermin, the 2/1 rat that brings a rat token along and grows when creatures die. And then you've got Conceited Witch, the 3 mana 2/3 menace with the adventure single black to put a wicked roll token on something. And they exist in that order in my mind, like 1, 2, 3. But none of them are as good as Minstrosity is. And not because Minstrosity is a better card. Minstrosity is not a better card, but there are so much fewer ways to affect the board on turn 2 than turn 3 that when I see a Minstrosity in a pack, I have to take it, because I know I will get one of those rectangle makers in the 3-drop slot download. Or maybe I don't get those cards, but I get a Feed the Cauldron. But, like, I'm going to get something that costs 3 mana that will be comparable. Maybe we're talking about C plus versus a C or whatever, that I value. And I'm not saying to take bad cards in the 1 and 2 drop slot. I'm not saying Toadstool Admirer up in that pick order. But I do feel strongly about the good 1s and 2s. It's why, like, whenever you take the Stockpiling Celebrant over a Hopeful Vigil, because you're like, oh, but Stockpiling Celebrant pairs so well with my white cards, like, you just have to take Hopeful Vigil, because it's going to open up your opportunities later in the draft because of that choke point at the 3 mana value slot.
Yeah, I hear it. You're kind of selling me. My initial reaction.
You made a face.
I did make a face for those of you that are on the YouTube channel, or those of you maybe that are listening via podcast that should be checking us out on YouTube. But I would be hard for me to pick one Minstrosity over Sweet Tooth Witch. I think that's what I was thinking about.
You're never pack one, pick one either of those cards.
I know,
like, that's a bad example.
I agree. I went through that whole discussion in my head and then decided that. But I hear what you're saying, as far as I have felt that as well, that your 3 mana value slot is pretty easy to get clogged. And there's been a lot of times the Stockpiling Celebrant one really spoke to me, because there's been a lot of times I want to pick Stockpiling Celebrant and I feel like I just can't. Like, I gotta take this 2 mana value thing, and maybe it's not even a Hopeful Vigil. Maybe it's just an Armory Mice. Like, I've made that pick before for my curve.
I did that in our showdown. We for folks who were clamoring for it, we did a draft battle video. You versus me. We're hopped in the same pod. You see Ben's draft, you see my draft, and we face the decks off against each other. I made that pick. Like, I took Armory Mice, I don't know, pick 3 or 4 or something. I think over something that was quote unquote better, but I was like, I just know that I'm gonna get to pick up something at the higher mana value slot, and I know I'm gonna want armory. Like armory mice is not great, but it's just fine. It's just fine. And what it's really got going for it is it costs 2 mana.
Well, and that's something that's specific to this format, right? That's not necessarily going to be true in every
No,
format, but I definitely have felt that here, and I think I would tend to agree after hearing you pitch it.
great.
All right, we're back with number 2. Know what wedge of the format you are drafting in.
Okay, so again, we're sort of bopping around this Jund format idea, but then I'm figuring out what you're saying from you're kind of in a Jeskai land these days, it sounds like.
Well, but I don't even think it matters what wedge you're in, as long as you know the wedge that's going on. So I'm gonna throw a color at you, and I want to see what it does for you. If I say you start with 2 blue cards, where are you anticipating your draft is going to go from there?
Oh, it kind of depends what they are, but like, where am I anticipating my draft is gonna go?
Or what wedges do you see? Like if we're talking 3 color wedges, like where you think the most likely outcomes are for you if you start with 2 blue cards?
I think it's probably most likely that I will want to be Grixis. I want to be playing in a Grixis space because I expect that I will want a color to pair with blue that is deep, and black and red are both quite deep, because I feel like blue struggles with some of the things blue struggles with is needs cheap interaction. And so I get torch or grapple, hopefully, from one of those 2 colors. It's going to struggle with a deep roster of commons. Both of those colors have that. And so that's what I'm going to be looking to boost up the power level of. I assume I'm starting off with 2 blue cards. They're going to be good. Also, red and black bargain well. Hopefully, one of those blue cards is maybe hatching plans, whatever. That's what I'm thinking of if you tell me I'm starting blue.
I think for me, it's Jeskai personally, or immediately the color I'm looking to pair with blue is probably white, honestly, because I think they go so well together in a control shell. But let's do a different one. Let's say you start with 2 black cards. What wedge do you see yourself playing in?
I do. I just end up in white a lot. So like I do end up in white a lot, and I would think black white, and
But
then
then I think you're probably hoping to not start black, right? If you want to end up in white, because those don't pair great with each other. I mean, there's the
not
there's
in
the
my
hopeless nightmare
experience.
stockpiling
Yeah.
celebrant thing, but like I don't know. Personally, I'm pretty down on black white.
I'm not me. Not for EthanTeenLands.com. Black
You
White's doing
you
well.
you love just working for those wins.
I love to work. Just let me spin the wheels. Let me take maximum game actions. But honestly, if we're talking about wedges with black, I think it's Mardu. I think I'm probably likely to pair it with red or with white.
And I think for me, I would be defaulting to the format Jund. I think if I'm starting black, just
Mm.
because the cards play so well together. Like I love black green as a deck. I love black red as a deck. You frequently want to splash around, or certainly maybe not even necessarily Jund. But if I start black, I'm looking to get into green, and then figuring the rest out from there. Like what other cards I'm going to splash, or if I'm going to be straight black green. But there's so many situations like that you can draw up about the format of you start a certain way and it means you're likely to end up in a certain space. Like we talked about this early on. I was trying to impress upon people after the staying open speech I gave. And I do still think that holds true. I think that holds water. I think you're supposed to stay open, and I think you're supposed to find a certain space in the format like this to play in, whether it's blue white control or black green food or white red aggro. But there's pillars of the format for strategies, right? And like your early picks dictate a lot which pillar you're steering towards, and just knowing what that means for your future picks and where you personally want to end up.
I'm going to ask you to clarify a little bit, because I think for me and for maybe our listeners, these 2 ideas sound a little bit at odds with each other. Because on the one hand, you're saying you can really stay open in the format, right? Which means you don't have to lock in to anything super early. And on the other hand, you're saying your first couple picks really dictate a lot about what you're going to do. Can you talk about how those 2 things are in conversation? Because they could sound like they're in opposition with each other.
Yeah, so for example, this is fresh on my mind because I was just watching this morning right before we recorded. I was watching Florida Man, Chris stream, and he had his pack one, pick one, and had a bunch of choices. Like he could have taken the blue 4/6 Flying Dragon, which was the pick he ended up making. He could have taken, Hopeful Vigil. He could have taken a red card. Like had options for like different equally similarly powered cards. Nothing great, like all on the C plus B minus ish, but all going in very different strategies. And I
Mm.
think once you start down a strategy, like it's hard to get off of that strategy. Like if you value cut in highly, for example, it's highly likely that you're going to end up in some sort of a red aggressive strategy. But whether that's parent, you have a while to figure out after you start down a red aggressive strategy, whether you're going to be red white aggro or red black rats or red green beatdown or red blue kind of tempo aggro there. So you start down an aggro strategy, you're kind of locked into playing aggro, but you can figure out where and how you're playing that aggro strategy. Whereas if you start your draft with something that leans more towards the late game, like once you start picking, like I guess those two things, almost like polar opposites
Hmm.
of, but there's mid range in there too. But the big picture strategy of your deck is hard to move off of. I think once you start down a big picture strategy, but then you have a lot of room to dive into a two color pair or figuring out a two color pair plus a splash or a three color. And when I say three color, you're not drafting full three color decks often. It's often two colors plus a splash of another color, but you have a while to figure out what that is after you pretty quickly narrow in on a bigger picture strategy.
Yeah, I think that rings true for me. The it's I don't often think about it as that's why my answers to your question of like you start blue, what's your wedge? Like I don't often think about it that way, but I am really thinking about maybe talking about secret gold cards is helpful here, or to just recognize that there are secret gold cards of like, okay, I've got cut in, but where is cut in going to be at its best? Ben outlined that great. You start off with the 4/6 dragon in blue. It's a great card, but then it's automatically it's like shrinking your opportunity to take expensive cards in the future, or there's a cost to taking expensive cards later, and it's also dictating your deck wants to reliably cast this. What does that mean? How does that mean I'm going to be filling out the bottom of my curve? Like what does that mean in terms of, am I more likely to want to pair it with green so I get some ramp? Am I, like what are the questions you're asking? That it's not just I took a blue card, pack one, pick one. There's so many other steps and layers and thoughts to
I think for me, a lot of it is what I don't want to put together.
it.
Also, is a
Yeah.
thing. So, for example, if I start pack one, pick one with Italian's Messenger, the blue 1/3 rare flying fairy, and my second pick is a tough cookie, I'm operating under the assumption that both of those cards are very unlikely to end up in the same deck for me. And then like down the road, I'm looking for which card I want to steer toward or which space I want to play in because they're in such different spaces and strategies of decks in my mind, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that definitely makes sense. All right. My number two. I couldn't possibly not talk about this without talking about it. The more game pieces, the more likely to win.
So this is a rectangle theory in disguise.
If you want to put a label on it, if you want to say rectangle theory, you can for sure. But I really do think that a lot of the things that I think about with this format boil down to, and it's one of the points I probably should have discussed with regards to the mana value choke point, is role tokens and bargaining, and both of those mechanics get better the more you affect the board on turn one and turn two. Both of those mechanics revolve around the space of rectangles, whether they are creating rectangles, but for role tokens to be good, or role tokens to be effective, you need to have bodies to put them on. And so you need to have cheap bodies to put them on so you can, drop them, or even if they're adventures, you can, adventure out your black 2/3 or your green 4/3 trample. You can adventure those out before casting them to get maximum value off of them. For bargain, as we talked about, bargain isn't actually, there's not really a choke point often for bargain in terms of fodder to sacrifice. The choke point is often in the bargaining, in the good bargain. We've also often talked about bargain is an upside on cards, right? The fact that Agatha's Champion, we thought, is the 5 mana 4/4 with trample. If you bargain it, it fights something. We thought that was going to be clunky going in. Turns out bargain's an upside. Having access to bargain is good because there are things that you want to sacrifice, whether it's your hopeless and hopeful enchantments to get that free scry 2, whether it's hatching plans that you're really trying to just get maximum bargain for to draw 3 for quote unquote free or cheap. Whatever it is, like how many times have we all candy grappled something that was a 2/2 and bargained it just so we could sacrifice something, could get a trigger, whatever it is. All of that stuff for me revolves around the space of the more game pieces you are making and interacting with, the more likely you are to win that game.
Okay, so many thoughts
Yes,
rolling through my
sir.
head with that. So first, diving into role tokens, kind of how they tie in with bargain, like sacrificing role tokens for bargain stuff as bargain fodder. I think role tokens have kind of fallen a little flat that way. I am down on role tokens personally compared to the start of the format.
Can you talk to me about what that means? Because I've went on a journey of role tokens, certainly, but I value Wicked and Young Hero role tokens quite highly.
Yeah, certainly Young Heroes, excellent. Wicked, also great. But I mean, in the sense of if I'm bargaining, especially, I would prefer to play cards like Redcap Thief that just brings a treasure for me to bargain away, or Sweet Tooth Witch that brings a food for me to bargain away. I have found that to be a much more convenient way to bargain than to put a roll token on something and then sacrifice that roll token. Like, I've largely experienced roll tokens in the aggressive sense of like my creature now has +1/+1 and has better attacks rather than roll tokens being bargain fodder.
Yes, I think that's true. And I also like I'm not there's a lot of filler or filler plus cards in the roll token department, like Besotted Knight, the 4 mana 3/3. You know, we talked about Conceited Witch as the 2/3 menace in black that is bottom of the barrel of that trio of black's 3 drops. I do think that that's certainly true, that like you kind of have to be a little choosier about role tokens these days. And I'm not thrilled to sacrifice them. I agree that I would rather sacrifice an enchantment like a Hopeful Vigil or a Hopeless Nightmare or a food token or a Prophetic Prism if I can handle it, you know?
Right. Like role tokens have almost turned into a niche space for me.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas like the things that what you're talking about with game pieces, like just making game pieces that are not role tokens like food or rat tokens,
Mm-hmm.
that I'm much more interested in than role tokens. And not that I won't do role tokens, but it's more of a specific thing like white green role tokens or Abzan role tokens than it is like a format wide. And to me, there's separate buckets. Like Young Hero is
Yeah.
just an aggressive card. That's just an aggressive deck. That's not really a synergistic
Uh-huh.
game piece in some senses. It's just an aggressive game piece.
Right. Yeah. It sort of plays in a different space. And it's why, like, you know, I went on a journey with Tanglespan Lookout. That's the Tuna Green 2/3. Whenever
It's not very good, right?
right. Whenever you make an aura, you draw a card. There was a while where that like train wrecked a lot of my drafts early because I would see it pick 5 and I'd be like, this card's insane. You gotta take it. But it's not really, because there are plenty of times where I end up, I mean, in green black decks that are all in on food. And then my Tanglespan Lookout is just a 3 mana 2/3. Or then I'm like, well, it causes deck tension because you start to think, am I supposed to play Conceited Witch over Sweet Tooth Witch because it
No.
makes an aura? No, right? I don't really want to do that. Am I supposed to play this Ferocious Werefox? Probably not, because like your 4-drop slot gets filled up so easily. And like, do I really want to spend the time to put the +1, the monster roll token on something if I'm going to get blown out or whatever? So I agree. I think Tanglespan Lookout is not that great. It's a more niche strategy. But I still stand by the rectangle theory of it all.
No, absolutely. But I think the point I want to dive into with that, I completely agree. I think the cards that are making more generic game pieces
Uh-huh.
are better than the ones that are making because like some of the role tokens, like there's a lot of cards in the format. Well, this is my next point, so we might as well get into it.
Let's do it.
Number 3, you need to know what the good cards in the format want, or even in some cases need alongside them. Like, so this is kind of what I was just getting at with yours. There's a lot of cards that come with a open-ended storybook, if you will, in Wilds of Eldraine, where you can choose your own adventure. But there's a lot of things that come pretty scripted. Like if you're taking Hatching Plans, very powerful card, you've got to get the bargain up, 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 up. Or for
It's
example,
going to be really hard for you to pass Johann's stopgap if you're taking Hatching Plans.
Yeah, but Johann Stopgap's not great. Like there's some cost with picking Hatching Plans highly, or Princess Takes Flight, or Tanglespan Lookout, as you said. You can turn Tanglespan Lookout into a pretty premium card. Should you? Like there's just a lot of implications with cards needing other cards or wanting other cards alongside them. And the best cards in the format are just great. Like they don't have those restrictions or prescriptions necessarily.
Mm-hmm.
So for example, cut in excellent in aggro. If you put cut in a mid-range or a controlling deck, it's going to be a lot less good if you're not pressuring the opponent with that young hero rule, right? Cut in's power is when you kill their blocker, swing in, grow your creature, and then grow your creature again the next turn to where they don't still have good blocks against it.
Because you're
But you,
mostly losing a mana advantage with that card, but it makes up for it with the young hero roll. Like you're often picking off, a 3-drop with cut in, but cut in doesn't care about that. You can pick off a 2-drop with it. Cut in doesn't care about you getting maximum mana value or maximum even damage value. Like, oh, I got to pick off this X4, pick off an X3, an X2, an X1 with it. Because then it's also enabling this attack, growing a thing and saying, now this thing not only is going to grow this turn, but next turn, and maybe the next turn, and maybe it's a ginger brute, and now you got to kill this too.
right, but I think the point I'm trying to make, the broader point, is I think there's probably people out there that are listening to our content, listening to other people's content, tuning into streams, and what you hear is cut-in's great, cut-in's busted, cut-in's broken, which it is. Like, I think all of those things about cut-in, it's excellent, but you have to do work to make it excellent. But and some of that, like some people never get into that, or not that they never get into it, but they don't often get into, well, to really make cut in busted as a removal spell, you have to have everything you said. You have to have really value ones and twos highly so that you're on board. You need to be in a focused aggro deck so that you're putting pressure on your opponent. It's not just intrinsically a great card. You have to do the work to put it in the right place to turn it into a great card. And there's tons of cards like that in the format, in the aggro space, in the mid-range space, in the control space, right? Kellen's Lightblades in your red-white aggro deck is fine. Like you can play it in your red-white aggro deck, but as soon as you slot it into blue-white control, it's a premium removal spell with bargain upside, you know?
Yes.
So
Yeah.
I think there's tons of things like that in the format that people aren't necessarily latching onto. So if you're struggling in the format, that would be the number one piece of advice I would give to people that are struggling in the format, is try to make sure you are putting good cards in the right home for them to really be maximum good, because there's a lot of cards that change wildly in value based on their home.
Well, I think I've switched around my order to dovetail off of your point into my next point, which is that color pairs are greater than their signposts.
Ooh, preach.
They're and honestly, other than, I would say, the two that jump out to me are Ash Party Crasher and Greta as like the two signposts that are great in their respective decks. Like Ash is, I think, one of the best cards in red white aggro, and actually point to what the color pair does best. They also happen to be, perhaps, I mean, I don't know, maybe according to the data, they're the two best decks. In my estimation, they're two of the best decks that you can draft. The rest of the color pairs, not only do they not need their signpost to be good, their signpost doesn't tell the whole story of what their color pair can or should do. And sometimes, and maybe in the case of like Johann, like fine in blue-red, honestly, Johann's a better splash in like red-green or teamer sort of oops all adventure soup than like, do you really need it in blue-red? You can do it, whatever. But like, there's just so much more going on in the color pairs than the signposts allude to.
Yeah, I think that's a premium. I think that might be the best point so far. It's good.
Wow.
You might be winning the point battle. But Johann, I was going to shout out, Johann is excellent in blue red, but I also then want to walk back. I was going to interrupt you and say that, but it also is great as a splash in blue white control, or great as a splash in blue green teamer or
Yeah.
life or whatever. It goes more places than just its home. And you can't really say that about Ash and Greta. Like you could be black green splashing something else, but you're still base black green if you're playing Greta. But yeah, I completely agree. The signposts are not telling the whole story of the format for sure.
And can take or leave them very often. I mean, certainly in the case of the blue ones, like Sheree and Obira, like really not telling the story of what. And can you get like a nuts blue white tap deck? Sure. Can you get a nuts blue black fairies deck? Sure. But largely those decks, one, they're going to depend on which color you're heavier slanted in. Are you more a blue based blue black or blue white deck, or are you more a base black version or a base white version of those decks? That's going to dictate part of what you're doing. But it goes back to that conversation of like, know where the cards are going in their homes. And part of that is knowing which color am I heavy in. I mean, honestly, it goes back to the pick of the Archive Dragon that Chris made this morning. Like, when you take that card, it's starting to tell a story when that card ends up in your deck at the end of the draft. It's starting to tell a story of the home you see yourself ending up in and what that means for the picks you're going to have to make down the road.
Yeah, completely agree. And I also think some of the signposts falling flat is that the off-color adventure cards are more powerful or leave you more open in more cases to put them in your deck and get more value as a result. I think that's where some of the soup or the two-color, like to me, I would characterize this format as a two-color plus splash format most often.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
And with the exceptions of, like, if you're lucky enough or good enough to have drafted a great red white or a great black green deck, like those are the two most common color pairs I think that do not.
That's why I feel incredibly unlucky that I opened 0 fixing in my sealed pool today.
It's brutal. All right, number 4, Mulligan sketchy hands.
So this is format specific. This sounds like a note for yourself, is what I'm going to say.
It's a note for other people out there too. I think this format is closer to Phyrexia All Will Be One on the Mulligan philosophy than an average format. I think you really want to have a play lined up and loaded on turn 2. And I think you need to have a really good reason to keep a hand that doesn't have a turn 2 play.
Wow. Okay. And you feel like that's true not just for aggressive decks, but just because of the prevalence of aggressive decks that you are likely to face?
I just think it's easy to auto lose if you don't have a cheap removal spell, a 1 or a 2 drop removal spell, or a 2 drop play if you're not paying attention. I just think you have to have a higher bar for getting on board early. And not that every matchup is going to be that way, but enough matchups are that way that I think you're opening yourself up to getting preyed on by the red decks if you don't make sure you have a Kellen's Lightblades in your opener or whatever.
Yeah. Yeah, I buy it.
I think there are 2-for-1s are trivially easy to come by in the format. Like, so you're gonna be like going down to 6, like you're gonna be able to make up card advantage. If you've got a couple hatching plans in your deck, you've got like there's
easy. You just have a couple hatching plans in your deck, he said.
I don't think that's crazy. People hate blue.
Yeah.
But I just think there's trivially easy ways to 2-for-1 to make up for mulliganing. And I think it's better to have a better opening hand than to have 7 cards in this format is what I would say.
Yeah.
And like kind of a personal note, I would agree with that. But I also think other people could benefit from my personal note to myself.
Well, you shouted out part of my 4th point, which is good interaction is premium. I mean, removal is back with a vengeance. Torch the Tower and Candy Grapple being the top performing commons in the format according to 17 lands. Top of my pick order for sure. I think good, cheap interaction is premium. Removal is excellent in this format. I then also think there is a bit of diminishing returns that doesn't apply to those 2 cards, certainly, because also they bargain, which is incredible for them. And then in the case of Torch the Tower, it's giving you a little scry sometimes. Exile is relevant, all that good stuff. But diminishing returns as you move up the curve, like Flick a Coin and Rat Out, both cards that are performing very well and I think are good, but definitely go in the diminishing returns category. Like, do I want a Flick a Coin in my red deck? Almost certainly. Do I want 3? Never, basically. Like maybe in a very heavy spells deck with like the catapults, maybe. Do I want a Rat Out in my black decks? Probably. Do I want 3 Rat Outs? Never. There's a diminishing returns quality to some cards. Do I want a Shatter the Oath? Sometimes I need some way to deal with something big. Do I need 3 of those? No, not at all. Of course you don't. Interaction is great. Like Cooped Up, you talked about Kellen's Lightblades. I think it sort of goes back to knowing what homes your removal spells are going well in, like the Cut-In being good in aggressive decks, the Lightblades being good in defensive decks. And it doesn't always split that evenly down the middle, in one bucket or another. Thinking about like, once you have X number of removal spells, how many more do you need when you're an aggressive deck, when you're a more controlling deck? But that all buckets back to good interaction is premium. Having that play on turn 1, on turn 2, to steal the play back from someone, as we talked about a lot in Phyrexia All Will Be One, when you get to fire off that Hex Gold Slash. When your Boros or Rakdos opponent plays their premium 2 and you get to Torch the Tower it and untap and play your second land, and now you've stolen the play from them, it's a great feeling.
Very good feeling. Cosign. Number 5. Unless you are focused aggro, make an effort to play and splash powerful rares or uncommon adventures you see.
I have a very similar 0.5, which is just don't be afraid to splash.
Oof, that's much cleaner. That's a way better tweet. You crushed me.
Don't be afraid to splash, folks. Talk to me, Ben, because you've been jumping ahead. You traveled in time to week 4 of the format on week 1. What's going on?
There's a lot of good stuff going on. I mean, there's a lot of great cards that are going late, especially if you're in pods with people who subscribe to like have to be aggro, have to be cabs, have to be focused. There's a lot of goodies that get left on the table, and you can snap those up and put them in your deck. And there's a lot of great tools for fixing for green decks and for non-green decks. So I think I think probably those 2 decks you outlined, red, white, and black, green. Blue, red's another common one where I don't splash at all. I would say those are the 3 most common no splashes. But otherwise, I'm snapping up the goodies that people are passing around the table, and I'm trying to put them in my deck.
I totally agree. I think because of the prevalence of fixing, you can get away with splashing, or your splashing can be a lot more incidental, right? Thinking about certainly something as powerful as Imidane's Recruiter, like making sure you have access to the off color, if that's in black, white, or black, red, making sure you have access to the off color part of that card is important, but it's not necessary. Like, it doesn't have to be as consistent as a true blue splash of like, gotta make sure I have 3 reliable sources. It can be like, I've got an edge wall in, maybe I'll choose white, maybe I don't, not a big deal. I've got this treasure from something, maybe I save it for Imidane's Recruiter, maybe I don't, not a big deal. Like, that sort of stuff is a conversation about splashing that we haven't had really in a format before.
Right. Well, and I also think just something of the mindset of, if I have an Imidane's Recruiter in my pile, it's going to be very hard for me to leave it on the sidelines, even if I don't end up red white. Like,
if you end up green black.
Yeah, like, I don't think it's crazy. There's a lot of ways to splash fixing. Like, I mean, maybe not if you're exactly green black, but it's gonna be tough for it to a path to have gone through the draft where that card doesn't end up in my main deck. And I also owe that card an apology. It might actually be the 4th best card in the set.
It might just be the best, honestly.
It's pretty good.
It's pretty gross. Yeah, I had double in my sealed pool yesterday, and then my last round opponent had 2 of them as well. And I was like, yep, this makes sense. Great lists. I loved that conversation. Shall we round out the episode today with some underrated cards, some little diamonds in the rough out there for our listeners to be able to snag in these last few weeks of the format?
Please do. Let's start with your OLIs, and then we'll start with my OLIs.
Okay, so I have 2. Yeah, 2 outside looking in of my top 5 underrated cards.
Ooh, wow, now I look like a jerk. I have 5 OLIs. You were like, I have so many underrated cards.
I did. I just sort of stopped. I could have gotten more. I just sort of stopped adding because I was like, I didn't see any of these. I didn't see any of the cards that I was choosing between unseating the top 5. Like, the top 5 I really wanted to talk about. So I would just sort of stopped. But I want to shout out 2. They're 2 artifacts. Somehow I have become the garbage red common equipment champion.
It's not a great place to be.
Not a great place to be, but I want to talk about Bespoke Battle Garb.
Oh no.
This is 1 in a red. This is 1 in a red for an equipment. Gives equipped creature +2/+0. But at a celebration, if you've celebrated before your combat phase, you can auto-equip it to something. And the auto-equip part of this is the way that I started to frame it in my head, is that, one of the ways we've seen equipment pass the muster test recently is that it has when it comes into play, you get to auto-attach it to something. So it sort of feels like an aura that then dies into a thing you can move around. Bespoke Battle Garb specifically in Boros aggressive decks, and like there's gonna be a lot of caveats here, but specifically in Boros aggressive decks, the fact that it contributes to a celebration trigger is really good. And that's one of the things I was talking about weeks ago, when I talked about not understanding Archon's Glory, which I now very much do understand that trick. But one of the things I was having trouble wrapping my head around was I care about celebration, but it doesn't contribute to the celebration conversation. Bespoke Battle Guard does contribute to that, and specifically contributes to it. Again, I'm going to say in aggressive decks with Ginger Brutes, which may or may not be a card I'm going to talk about in my top 5. But when you've got Ginger Brutes, Battle Garb is just such a great way to suit them up. A 3-power unblockable creature is a real clock. And then Battle Garb just threatens to go somewhere else once they answer the Ginger Brute. It's Alsa, which I did look up for all of my cards. It's at average last seen at is 8.5. So it's not really underrated, but I do think it's a card that I don't see people thinking about enough when they're building their Boros decks, and those are some spots to think about it.
Question I have for you. How many of your Boros decks do you expect to play Bespoke Battle Garb on average?
More than 50%.
Whoa.
Play a Bespoke Battle Garb. I would say more than 50%.
Wow. That is shocking to me.
My other OLI is Ariet's Tempting Apple. This is the 4-mana artifact. It's legendary. 4-mana artifact. It steals something, and then you can pay 3 to either crack it as a food to gain 3 life or to have your opponent lose 3 life. Shout out to Beers SC, who is a frequent stream. So he's a frequent stream attendee and member of our Discord when he decides to pop in and share a deck with me. But he early on was like, I think the two active treason variants in Ariet's Tempting Apple and what's a Tempting Fealty is the red one, which would have been on my list too. But then I was like, I can't put both, whatever. But the 2 steal effects I think are quite good. Ariet's Tempting Apple really gets that bump for the loss of life. It just really is not hard for this card to truly win you the game with both parts of it being relevant. And
it's like a lava axe that deals 8.
Right. Like it's so good. And then there is like a little bit, you have food synergy. Like I randomly had a green-white deck with 2 copies of Knight of the Sweet's Revenge. And then I was just like, sick. I'll play Ariet's Tempting Apple on that because it's a steal effect that then turns into a mana rock for me. Like this is excellent. So I just think the card has a lot more applications than its Alsa at 5.63 would state.
All right. My OLIs. I have 3 that are kind of grouped into a category here, but Collector's Vault, Brave the Wilds, and Evolving Wilds. All OLI. And I think people are recognizing them as good cards, but I still don't think people are picking them quite highly enough. Like if you see yourself playing in a space that is not focused aggro, those cards I think are borderline irreplaceable for you to pick up. Certainly Evolving Wilds is the best of them. Collector's Vault, I'm willing to say is a bit mana intensive, but if you're green, like Brave the Wilds is incredibly important to pick up. I still just think those cards are underrated somehow.
Yeah, I co-sign that for sure.
Next, OLI Hearth Elemental. This is 5 and a red for the 4/5. And it has an adventure for 1 in a red where you can discard your hand, draw 2 cards, and it also costs 1 less to cast for each instant sorcery or adventure card in your graveyard. I picked this the other day, and it was like 7th pick or something, and I was not red. And someone said, you have all creatures. Sure, like great. Hearth Elemental is an excellent card at 6 mana 4/5 with the adventure of 1 in a red, discard your hand, draw 2 cards. Like it's just a very good Magic the Gathering card, regardless of how much synergy you have with it. The floor is very high, and then you can turn it into an even better card if you have instant sorceries and adventures.
I can't tell you how many times my opponent has like 1 card left in their hand, and they're like going to tap out. And I'm like, great, what? Bring it on! Like now you empty your hand, and they adventure Hearth Elemental, and I'm like, oh my god, because it's not draw 2. It's draw 3, and one of the 3 is a 4/5.
Yeah, like, your opponent just cracked Hatching Plans with a 4/5 attached to it.
So it's a very good card, and the reverse. So certainly great to take late, no synergy, whatever. The reverse is you can get like 2 early, And then that's your whole plan, is like my deck is all cheap stuff so that whenever I see Hearth Elemental, my hand's empty and it's a draw 3.
Yeah, I think the card is. I think people recognize the card is good. I don't think they recognize how good that card is. And lastly, on this list, Tenacious Tome Seeker, 2 and a blue, 3/2 bargain. When you bargain, it bring back an instant or a sorcery. This card wheels. Like
Yeah.
this card should never wheel. Like if this card is wheeling, you should be drafting blue, in my opinion. It's very powerful. Like the bargain is great on it. Rebuying a cheap removal spell, it's just so much value packed into one card. And not something you're going to first pick, but something that goes too late, I think, because of how bad of a rap blue has gotten.
Completely cosign. All right, my number 5, because Ben forced me to put these into an actual factual order.
Yes, let's go.
We're going to go bottom up here. And my number 5 is Knight of the Sweet's Revenge. This is 3 and a green for an enchantment. When it enters the battlefield, you get a food. All of your food taps for green mana, and you can pay 7 to sacrifice Knight of the Sweet's Revenge. Give all of your creatures +X, where X is the number of food you control, at sorcery speed. This card is awesome. It, like I said, sort of in a similar vein to Hearth Elemental. Like, it's great in a dedicated food deck. And once you get 2, which is not hard to do because people don't like it, it becomes your whole deck's game plan. And all of a sudden, cards like Ariet's Tempting Apple or Candy Trail become just, Candy Trail especially, just becomes a 1 mana rock that scries 2 for you.
And then when you don't need it anymore, you can sack to draw a card and gain 3. Whew.
Your Hollow Scavengers just become incredible. Your Sweet Tooth Witches become incredible. These little 3/2s that make food, that also are mana dorks that have haste because the food doesn't have summoning sickness to tap. So double spelling or casting the adventure off Hollow Scavenger is just free because it replaces itself. Like, I think Knight of the Sweet's Revenge is really cool. Honestly, for the mana portion of it first. And then at a certain point, you go, what are you at? How many bodies do I have? And maybe it doesn't even win you the game, but it puts your opponent in a tough spot at the very least. I think this card's great.
It's rectangle theory at its finest.
That's true.
My number 5, Kellen's Light Blades. 1 and a white, instant speed, deal 3. You can bargain to destroy an attacking or blocking creature. Card is incredible in control decks and goes criminally late, I think, as a result of people not wanting to draft control decks and people being a little down on white. I think white has gotten, like, blue I would buy as a little maybe less powerful than the other 4 colors. I think white's up there with black and green, certainly. And I think red is great. Like, to me, it goes like, the format goes red, gap, Abzan colors, kind of a gap,
blue.
Like, that's how I would characterize the format.
I buy that little Abzan sandwich. My number 4, a card we've already talked about today, Hatching Plans. 1 and a blue for an enchantment. Whenever Hatching Plans goes to the graveyard from the battlefield, you draw 3 cards. I will contend that I believe Hatching Plans is blue's best non-rare in the format. I think it is incredible and goes criminally late. I think, Sam Black sort of has been talking about this on his stream. I haven't listened to his episode, but I know he did an episode of Drafting Archetypes on Blue Bargain. And his idea about blue as bargain really opened my eyes because it unlocked what I thought. I was like, Hatching Plans feels like it's this sort of island of a card because it's so good, but how do you, group that into what else blue is doing? Well, and it's thinking about all the cards that we've sort of talked about. Like, I do like Johann Stopgap more than you, it sounds like, but certainly the Tome Seeker that you shouted out already, but even Diminishing Witch, the common 3/2 that puts a cursed roll token on something if you bargain it. Like, that's Hatching Plan's best friend because you can get the witch so late and it's not bad. It's just not bad. And like, Hatching Plan's so good. Every time my opponent plays this on turn 2, I have a sinking feeling because I just know at a certain point, very soon, they're going to be drawing 3.
Yeah, card's great. Number 4 for me, Edgewall Inn. The land ETBs, you get to choose a color, 3 tap, rebuy an adventure card. This card goes so late. I refuse to almost pass Edgewall Inn. Like, it's got to be a premium card in the format for me to take it over Edgewall Inn. Card just does so much. It ties the rim together so many times in decks that are trying to splash. It rebuys two of the best cards in the format in Hearth Elemental and Imidane's Recruiter.
Mm-hmm.
And not even those two. So many of the off-color adventure cards are just backbreaking. It's a land that is a 3-for-1 at like zero cost to the playable count in your deck. It's so powerful.
Yeah, I completely co-sign. Very hard for me to pass that card. Number 3, I told you might be on my list, and here it is, Ginger Brute. He's back from original Eldraine. It's a single mana artifact. It has haste. It's a 1/1. It's a single mana artifact. It's a 1/1 with haste. You can pay 1 to make it not be able to be blocked except by creatures with haste, and you can pay 2 to crack it as a food to gain 3 life. Ginger Brute is young hero role token's best friend. It's bespoke battle garb's best friend. It is, I think, a secret red card in the format, but is not treated as such. I think people pass up on this too much. And I would say probably, and then the flip side is play it too much in black-green decks.
Yes, that's what I was going to say. Somehow both.
Yeah.
They pass it too much and they play it too much.
Right. The food part of this should not allure you into black-green, but the aggressive, hasty, pseudo-unblockable nature of this should definitely appeal to you. And it if you think about it as a red card, it's one of red's best threats at common.
Yeah. Point for you from the crash course. I'm embarrassed at my evaluation of this card.
I see, but all my evaluation was we missed this card in original Eldraine, so I'm just gonna assume I'm missing stuff about this card in this format.
That's a great call by you. Number 3 on my list, Red Cap Thief. 2 and a red for the 2/3 ETBs. Make a treasure. This is not like an aggressive card, but if you're playing red decks that are not red-white aggro, Red Cap Thief is excellent. It's Sweet Tooth Witch levels of good. It's a 2/3. It's treasure to help you splash. It's rectangle theory. It is all of those things, and I have a crush on Red Cap Thief. Not gonna lie, this biggest mover up for me, I think, in the last 2 weeks.
Yeah, I buy it. I'm like, are we gonna have no overlap on these
That
lists?
would be impressive.
That would
Magic
be very
the Gathering
impressive.
is an great game.
Yeah. My number 2, Hopeless Nightmare. Single black for an enchantment. When it enters the battlefield, your opponent loses 2 life and they discard a card. Whenever Hopeless Nightmare goes to the graveyard, you scry 2 and you can pay 2 and a black to sacrifice it. Somehow, this is on 17 lands both the 4th best common in the set, and also its average last seen at is at 5. It's at 4.97. That is criminally late. This card goes 6th, 7th, 8th, wheels sometimes, because I think people just don't get it. And there is an interesting thing where Hopeless Nightmare you can cut it, right? From your best red-black aggressive decks, from your decks that don't have synergy with it as a way to pick it up with Celebrant, or you have bargain, you have this sort of tipped scales of, I have too few ways to bargain and far too much fodder. I don't have a way to freely sacrifice this. There are times where this is on the sidelines, but more often than not, this card is excellent. Fire this off early and often. Happy to play it on turn 1 and just have that thing sitting on the battlefield for me to do with what I want as the game progresses. I think this card is criminally underrated.
I'm somebody that's contributing to those stats. I'm too low on this card, most likely, and I agree that it is good. I want to shout it out as the prime example of one of the cards I was talking about that needs other cards around it, right?
Know the home for sure.
Know the home. And like exactly like you said, it's the type of card that can be one of the best cards in your deck, or maybe you don't include it, which is just a very cool feature of this format, I think. All right, my number 2, Barrow Naughty. 1 and a black for that 1/3 flying fairy. It's lifelink if you control another fairy, and you can pay 2 and a black to pump it. I really like this card. It works well with itself. It's tough, I think, to find a home for it, but when you do have the right deck for it again, this all of a sudden goes from a card that is like the power level just ranges so wildly. And again, it's not a high pick, but it's if you find the right home, if you have a deck that wants Barrow Naughty, you're wheeling a premium 2-drop for your deck.
Well, that's one of the very cool things about it is that you get the first one like pick 7, 8, 9, and then the next one skyrockets in value. And to all of a sudden where you're like in pack 3, you're like, well, I really like it could wheel, but I don't want to risk it not wheeling. So I'm going to just take my 3rd Barrow Naughty right now.
Some Whisper Squad vibes from
Yeah,
Ikoria.
right? Like, because they do pump each other up so much. And obviously then, like, there are other fairies that in black you're happy to play. If you end up in blue black, you know, fairies there. But like, I'm hoping to not play bad fairies to make my Baronauties have lifelink. But that's why when you have multiple Baronauties, it's just a nice package to go anywhere.
It's tough to get it to work outside of blue black. I do think that's true because I have been very high on this card. I've tried a lot. It's tough to get it to work outside of blue black. But if you do, it's also again very good.
Yeah. My number one, back for seconds.
We did it.
We did it.
Different lists.
No
That's
overlap.
Incredible.
Even on the OLI, that is incredible. Back for seconds is 2 and a black for an uncommon sorcery. You can return 2 creature cards from your graveyard to your hand. If you bargain it, though, you can return one of those creatures if it's mana value 4 or less from the graveyard straight to the battlefield. Both you and I think, were high on this in seeing it go around the table in our latest draft battle video. And we got a comment on YouTube about why are we high on this card? Even among top players on 17 lands, its win rate is not great. And its win rate is baffling to me because every time my opponent resolves this or I resolve this, I feel like I can't lose. Like, again, bargain on this is upside. Getting to rebuy a 3-drop or 4-drop straight to the battlefield is absurd. Like, you get it, you get stockpiling Celebrant back, and then you're picking something up, and then what, it's just, it has the ceiling on this card is through the roof, I think. And it is definitely a card that I have had to sort of temper a little bit, because when I see it 4th, 5th, 6th, I'm like, this is crazy. But I recognize that in the sense I'm crazy because I'm the one valuing it so highly that I've had to adjust that a little bit on Arena. But the power level of this card is wildly high.
Yeah, I like back for seconds. I don't think I'm quite as high on it as you, but it's very good. Love back for seconds. Number 1 for me, underrated cards, Ice Out, baby. Oof. 1 blue, counter target spell. It's got bargain. If you bargain it, it's blue. There is no better feeling than having control of the board and having an Ice Out in your hand in this format. And conversely, it feels terrible when your opponent goes Ginger Brute, 2-drop, whatever it's in your hand.
Correct.
But I do think blue-white's certainly the best home for this because you get Kellen's Light Blades to pair along with it. You get the quick studies. Like, you can play draw, go, control in this format, and Ice Out is incredible in those decks. And you get it so late. Like, there's just so many ways to turn in D-looking cards into much better cards in your deck, and I think Ice Out is the perfect example of that. You never need to spend a high pick on it, but it's a very powerful card.
Bargain, just upside on this card.
Yeah, like, bargain's great.
Many times when you have 4/3 mana available, you bargain this because you get to sacrifice that hatching plans, whatever. Like, bargain is just pure upside on this. Again, a card that I was like, bargain doesn't matter on this. Like, it's just cancel. Nope. Bargain's great.
Yeah, bargain is truly excellent.
This was fun.
Yeah. All right. Any parting thoughts before we go?
More lists, and good luck to me in Sealed Day 2.
Good luck to you. I want to know which deck you end up running. I hope it is black-green, and I hope you crush.
I gotta say, before the episode, Ben was like, you should message 2 Duck Cube, message Carl, and see what he thinks between the red-black aggro and the black-green soupy gruff triplets deck. Unfortunately, he said red-black.
Did he really? I'm so disappointed in you, Carl.
Yeah. But I think,
on that note,
I think I'm going to run the black-green one.
Let's do it. Let's go. All right. Good luck, man.
Thanks, bud.
Great place to wrap us up. Thank you, as always, to Salty Pretzels for our intro and outro music. Make sure you give it a listen.
Thanks so much to Cool Stuff Inc. for sponsoring this podcast. If you're heading over there, and you should head over there, please use code LOL when you check out to let them know we sent you there, and more importantly, to get 5% off anything that you purchase. You can find all of our content at lordsoflimited.com. Links to our Twitch streams, links to our YouTube channel, baby, popping off with the episode every week and trying to get at least one other piece of content on the YouTube channel every week for you. So be sure to check that out, like and subscribe, all that good stuff. You can find links to our tier list, to our merch, to our episode backlog, all of that at lordsoflimited.com.
If you've got any feedback about the show or any questions, shoot us an email at lordsoflimited@gmail.com.
Thanks so much for listening, and we'll catch you next week for another episode of Lords of Limited.
Thanks, everybody. See you later.